At L451 on Luzon, the first American was already dead. Not outside the wire. Not in the firefight at the tree line. Not even facing the enemy. He died in the dark, inside the perimeter, while most of the outpost was still asleep, because the attack didn't begin with gunfire. It began with a blade. Near Dingalan Bay, where jungle pressed tight against the coastline, and every trail narrowed into something that could be watched. An American outpost sat in a shallow pocket of cleared earth, stitched together with sandbags and routine. It guarded a supply route that mattered not because it was famous, but because it was necessary, one of those thin lifelines that kept men fed and moving in a campaign that had outlasted most soldiers' ability to imagine an end. The perimeter was small, not a fortress, not a base, just a temporary shape cut into hostile terrain. In daylight, it looked ordinary tents, crates, shallow pits, and a faint track leading in and out. But before dawn, it became something else entirely, a place defined by what it could not control. Visibility was limited. Sound carried strangely. A snapped branch could mean nothing or everything. Most of the men inside the wire were asleep. Not from carelessness, but because sleep came in fragments when you lived on rotations. Hours on duty, hours off. Shifts that blurred until fatigue became normal, like insects and humidity. They trusted the sentries. They trusted the routine. They trusted the night to behave like it always had. Outside the perimeter, the jungle was still. Not peaceful, just waiting. The canopy trapped the breeze. The undergrowth swallowed movement. But there were men moving through it. They didn't move like an army on the march. No shouted orders. No rattling gear. This was deliberate. Silent. More than 100 Japanese soldiers were closing in on that outpost. They weren't wandering. They had watched the position for days. They knew the rotations, the habits, the weak points where the wire could be slipped. The Americans had dug in to protect the route. The Japanese had studied the outpost to erase it. By 1945, the fighting on Luzon had fractured into smaller battles, isolated pockets of resistance that still carried the same lethal intent. Some of these groups were disciplined. Others were desperate. Either way, they were dangerous. The men moving now weren't coming to probe the perimeter. They were coming to overrun it. They carried rifles, grenades, knee mortar, and blades meant for close work. Their goal was simple: breach the line, collapse the defense before it could form, and leave nothing behind but silence. For them, speed mattered. But silence mattered more. The first element moved ahead of the main body like a knife tip. Their orders were not to fire. Gunshots would wake the camp and give the Americans direction. Instead, they would remove the first sentries quietly, open a gap, and let the assault flow through before anyone inside understood what was happening. They reached the edge of the outpost, where jungle turned into trampled dirt. The infiltration party moved with calm precision. They knew where the gaps were. They knew where the grass was flattened. They knew where a sentry's attention drifted during the coldest hour before dawn. Inside the perimeter, 3 Americans manned a light machine gun position. It was the outpost's anchor. Not because it was glamorous, but because it could turn darkness into a wall. Earlier, another soldier had been on that gun. He finished his shift and walked back to his tent, laying down with his rifle close, not out of drama, but because you didn't leave it far in a place like this. The tent canvas was thin. It held in heat and breath. It could not hold out death. At 0451, as he lay there in the dark, the outpost was already being entered. The infiltration party reached the first tents. Behind them, the main force flowed forward without light, guided by memory and discipline. The distance between the jungle and sleeping Americans was now measured in steps. One infiltrator reached the tent where the off-shift soldier lay. He could hear breathing. That was the point of this phase. Kill without noise. And a life without waking the man beside him. And a life without waking the man beside him. Prevent the panic that turns an ambush into a fight. The outpost did not know it had been breached. No alarm sounded. No warning shout cut through the camp. The sentries still scanned outward, expecting danger to come from the jungle, not from inside the wire. That was the brutality of surprise. It didn't announce itself. It arrived already in the room, and inside that tent, the blade came down. The first sensation was heat-sharp and immediate, followed by the realization that his head had been struck. For a second, there was no context. Only pain. Only the certainty that he was bleeding. Blood ran down the side of his face, warm at first, then cold as it spread. It blurred his vision and filled his mouth with a metallic taste. Above him, in the darkness, there was a shape. Close. Wrong. The enemy had stepped inside. There was no time to think. Only one truth mattered. If he stayed where he was, he would die. His hand found his rifle by memory more than sight. He didn't aim. He swung. The rifle butt hit bone. The shape staggered. He swung again, harder. A dull crack. Wet. Final. The attacker collapsed out of view. For a moment, there was silence again, but it was the wrong kind. Not peace. A pause before the storm. Outside the tent, he heard movement many feet, fast and close. Men moving with purpose. Attacking. The outpost was being swallowed. He forced himself up, the world tilting as blood ran down his face. He could feel the torn edge where part of his ear should have been. He stepped out into the camp, and the night was no longer quiet. Muzzle flashes flickered. Shouts erupted. Rifle fire snapped through the darkness. Men screamed, some in rage, some in pain. He had slept through the first breach. Now he was awake inside chaos. He didn't look like a hero. Half-dressed, bleeding, stumbling forward on instinct. His name was John McKinney. And before the army found him, he belonged to a different kind of life. He grew up in rural Georgia, where poverty wasn't a tragedy. It was normal. You didn't complain. You worked. You hunted because you had to. A boy in those woods learned patience early. He learned to move quietly. He learned to watch for small changes, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, movement that didn't belong. He learned to make every shot count. War didn't change him. It only replaced Georgia woods with Pacific jungle. Now, bleeding and half awake, he wasn't thinking about pride. He was thinking about survival, because training assumes time. And he didn't have time. 30 yards away, the machine gun position was visible in the darkness. It was the anchor of the outpost defense. If it fell, the camp would be cut apart. And he could see figures moving around it. Too many. Too close. The gun pit was already being taken. He moved toward it because the alternative was worse. As he ran, pain pulsed in his skull. His balance was off. His vision narrowed under adrenaline. He reached the position and saw the nightmare made real. Japanese soldiers were inside the gun pit. Several of them. Some were trying to swing the gun around. Others held rifles, waiting for Americans to rush in. The American crew was gone. The machine gun was no longer protection. It was about to become execution. McKinney didn't slow down. He fired as he moved. One man dropped, then another. He reached the sandbags and climbed in. The space was too tight for a clean fight. Bodies collided. Bayonets flashed. He kept firing until the rifle ran dry, the bolt walking back with a sound that meant one thing: empty. No time to reload safely. So he used the rifle the only way left, as a club. Wood and steel slammed into flesh. Ugly, desperate violence in a space measured in inches. His hands were slick with blood. His arms burned. When the last movement stopped, he stood inside the pit, breathing hard, surrounded by bodies. But the fight wasn't over. It was only changing shape. He turned to the machine gun. It was damaged, jammed, dead metal. He yanked at the mechanism. Nothing. The weapon would not cycle. And without it, the outpost had no anchor. No wall. No chance. He looked up, blood still running down his face, and understood the truth with brutal clarity. He was wounded. He was alone, and the enemy was still coming. He didn't feel like a legend. He felt like a man trapped in a fight that refused to end. Outside the pit, rifle fire snapped across the perimeter. Shouts rose and fell. The outpost was being cut apart in fragments. McKinney could have stayed inside the pit. It was cover. It was safety. But staying meant waiting. And waiting meant letting the enemy control the rhythm. He needed to change the rhythm. He needed to hit them before they regrouped. So he climbed out into open ground. No sandbags, no protection. Just darkness and risk. A round snapped past him close enough that he felt it. He didn't flinch. He kept moving. Americans were firing now, scattered and uneven. They were awake, but late. The enemy had already inserted men inside the perimeter. The fight was happening in pieces. McKinney's decision was to stop fighting in pieces. To deny the enemy the gun pit as a foothold, even if the weapon was dead. He could not repair the machine gun, but he could hold the position. And minutes mattered. Because in a night attack, minutes could be the difference between survival and slaughter. He reached the sandbags again and saw movement in the tree line. More shapes gathering. More bodies preparing to rush. The next wave was coming. McKinney steadied his rifle, breathing hard through pain, and waited. The firing stopped the way it often did in the jungle unevenly. Not with a signal, but with exhaustion. Shots spaced out. Then silence returned in pieces, filled by moans, distant voices, and the insects that didn't care who lived or died. Not with a signal, but with exhaustion. Shots spaced out. Then silence returned in pieces, filled by moans, distant voices, and the insects that didn't care who lived or died. Dawn revealed what darkness had hidden. The outpost was small. Too small for what it had endured. Sandbags torn open. Wire sagging. Tents collapsed. And near the machine gun position, the ground looked wrong. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Some slumped over the parapet. Others twisted in open ground, caught mid-stride. The smell settled in with daylight. Cordite. Damp earth. Blood. McKinney was still there. Not standing in triumph. Sitting, because his legs no longer trusted themselves. His uniform was ripped. His hands were stained. His face streaked with dried blood. He pressed a bandage against the side of his head where his ear had been cut. Men from Company A approached carefully, weapons raised. They didn't approach him like a hero. They approached him like something they didn't understand. They looked at the bodies. They looked at the gun pit. They looked at McKinney. And for a moment, no one spoke. The platoon sergeant finally broke the silence. He started counting, not out of curiosity, out of procedure. 40, 41. Then they stopped. They counted again. The number didn't change. Combat reports were often exaggerated. In the dark, men fired at shadows. Multiple soldiers claimed the same kill. But this wasn't scattered. This was concentrated. The sergeant asked McKinney what happened. McKinney answered the way he fought. Short, plain, no decoration. The tent, the blade, the run, the jam, the waves. No speeches, no hero talk. Just what happened. The sergeant didn't believe him. So the story moved upward. Reports were written. Witnesses questioned. The site examined. Shell casings counted. Angles of fire traced. The ground confirmed it. The machine gun position had been taken and reclaimed so violently that the enemy never recovered. The outpost had been minutes from collapse, and one man had stopped it. The paperwork that followed was slow and cold. The Army did not give its highest decoration on emotion. It required proof. In this case, proof was simple. Bodies. A count. A perimeter still standing. When the Medal of Honor was approved, it arrived wrapped in formal language that made violence sound clean. Gallantry. Intrepidity. Above and beyond. Words that could be read aloud without forcing anyone to picture the mud, the blood, the darkness, and the sound of a rifle stock hitting bone. McKinney stood in uniform again, older than he had been on Luzon. The scar remained where his ear had been cut. The metal rested against his chest, like something that belonged to another man. Photographs captured the moment the way history prefers: neat, framed, understandable. But the cost didn't live in photographs. It lived in the way he slept lightly afterward, in the way loud noises made his body react before his mind caught up. The war ended, and he went home. Not into celebration, but into quiet routines that demanded normal behavior from a man who had spent minutes doing something no normal life could prepare you to carry: farming, work, familiar roads, familiar faces. People asked questions, and he answered briefly, without embellishment, as if fewer words meant less power for the memory. He didn't build a legend around himself. He didn't chase attention. He simply lived with it, because that was what came after. History recorded the number: 41 bodies, one report, a medal. But history did not record the moment he realized he was alone. It did not record the sound of his rifle locking empty while men were still coming. It did not record the exhaustion in his muscles or the way blood loss blurred his vision while he kept fighting anyway. History recorded the outcome, not what it took. And that is often the quiet cost of survival in war. The world remembers the part that can be counted and forgets the part that can only be carried.